Hello folks, this is Andrew, and in this video we're going to have a look at the intrinsic muscles of the larynx. So the larynx has intrinsic and extrinsic muscles. Yeah, the extrinsic muscles are about moving the whole larynx itself. The intrinsic muscles are more to do with moving the vocal cords specifically. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on those muscles, the muscles that move the vocal cords. Okay, now the larynx is really fiddly. Yeah, it's really, for being such a small part of the body, it's quite complicated and there's a lot going on. Yeah, there's loads of cartilages to learn about, there's membranes to learn about, there's spaces to learn about, yeah, the vestibule, the ventricle and all that sort of stuff. So you've got to break the larynx up into bits, otherwise it can very easily sort of overwhelm you. So yeah, in this video we're just going to be focusing on the muscles inside the larynx that are responsible for moving the vocal cords. Okay, I think this is quite a high yield sort of bit of anatomy in terms of exams and stuff like that, and it's also it's a dynamic bit of anatomy. Yeah, there are principles to understand here, and if you get that understanding down, then actually the learning becomes a lot easier. Whereas like just learning landmark after landmark of various cartilages and bones and all this sort of stuff, it's just a bit boring. So hopefully we'll have a bit of fun with this. So the basics to build on for intrinsic muscles of the larynx, the take-home messages are, number one, I've already said it, these 6 muscles, there are 6 muscles here, they're all involved in moving the vocal cords. Now, we all associate the vocal cords with phonation, the production of sound. Actually, from an evolutionary perspective, there's a more important role of the vocal cords, and that is protecting your trachea and lower airways from aspiration. Yeah, you take a sip of water and it goes down the wrong way, you need to be able to slam your vocal cord shut to stop it going any further down into your lungs. Yeah, so that's, if anything, the more important role of the vocal cords, and that will be important when we think about the functions of the muscles. Okay, number 2, the vocal cords themselves, there's only actually 4 movements to be aware of what your vocal cords can do. Yeah, you can make the cords longer, which is tension. You can make them shorter, which is relaxation. You can pull them apart, which is abduction, or you can push them together, which is adduction. Yeah, they're the only 4 things you can do with the vocal cords. So each of these 6 muscles is going to be responsible for one of those 4 movements. Yeah, and you think about it like that, it sort of simplifies things a little bit. Okay. Number 3, the vocal cords themselves. The vocal cords are stretched between your thyroid cartilage, which is like the snowplow cartilage that's at the front of the larynx, and your 2 arytenoid cartilages, which are at the back of the larynx. Yeah, thyroid cartilage at the front, the arytenoids at the back. So if we're wanting to move the vocal cords with any one of these muscles, they have to either move the thyroid cartilage or the arytenoid cartilages. Okay, so all 6 of these muscles are going to act on one of those 2. Yeah, again, simplifies things a little bit. Right? What am I up to? Number 4. The names help you. That's a good one in the larynx in particular. Yeah, the names of these muscles tell you exactly where they come from and where they go. And if you understand that and you have a good enough 3D sort of image of where these muscles actually physically are, the functions make sense. Yeah, because you can just picture what's going to happen when the muscle gets shorter. Yeah, this is a really good example of putting that sort of spatial thinking into practice. Yeah, so that's number 4. And then finally, number 5, all 6 of these muscles are innervated by the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10. Yeah, 5 out of the 6 are innervated by the recurrent laryngeal branch of the vagus nerve. 1 out of the 6 is by the superior laryngeal branch of the vagus nerve. And we'll divide those up when we get to it. Okay? So yeah, I quite like the muscles, I quite like the intrinsic muscles of the larynx. I find this quite interesting. So hopefully this will be useful for you. Let's give it a go. Okay, so before we get into the muscles themselves, we do have to do a bit of building of like the laryngeal skeleton, don't we? We need to know where some of these cartilages are in order to know where the vocal cords are and in order to know where the muscles are, yeah? Now, I don't know about anyone else, but I have never found a diagram of the larynx in any textbook or anything that makes sense to me. I think because it's so difficult to sort of visualize, they try and do all sorts of stuff in textbooks. They try and they cut it and then open it and expect that to make sense to you and all this sort of stuff. I've always really struggled to visualize the larynx. Now I'm not going to be able to fix that on my shitty whiteboard, but I just want to get the the bare bones across. Yeah, so let's see how we do. So in terms of what we need to know for the muscles, yeah, we just need to put some of the cartilages in place and know roughly where they are so that we know where the vocal cords are, okay? So if we do, let's do an anterior view first. Yeah, if you look at the larynx from an anterior view, yeah, you're probably only going to see three things, yeah? Right at the top, you're going to see the hyoid bone. Yeah, the hyoid bone roughly at the level of C3, yeah, the spinal level of C3. And the hyoid bone's a really unique bone. It's the only bone in the human body that doesn't attach to any other bone, which is kind of cool, yeah? It's completely just hanging, suspended by muscles above it and muscles below it, yeah? Now, some sources don't put the hyoid as part of the larynx. They say that the larynx is only cartilages. I would say it is, because a lot of the extrinsic muscles of the larynx do attach here. So I would include the hyoid bone as part of the larynx, okay? So that's what you'll see at the top, yeah? Hyoid bone at the level of C3. You drop down below that, the next thing you'll see is your thyroid cartilage. Yeah, and I sort of said previously, the thyroid cartilage is like a snowplow shape, yeah, that sits at the front of the larynx, yeah? So there's nothing, it doesn't do anything at the back, yeah? It's a hanging sort of snowplow, okay? And this is sort of, yeah, the top of it is like the level of C4, the bottom of it is around the level of C5 in terms of your spinal levels, okay? This front point here, yeah, this bit here, this is called your laryngeal prominence, and this is what we would refer to as the Adam's apple. So this is what everyone can feel on themselves, yeah? And this is a good starting landmark to sort of navigate your way around the rest of the larynx, yeah? Find your Adam's apple. So that's your thyroid cartilage, that sort of snowplow at the front. And then finally, underneath the thyroid cartilage, you've got your cricoid cartilage, okay? Now, the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage are attached to each other, yeah? There's a joint here that sort of attaches the two together, okay? But the cricoid cartilage is the most inferior cartilage of the larynx, around the level of C6. Once you get below the cricoid, you're then out of the larynx and into the trachea. Yeah, into the actual airways. Okay, so that's the cricoid cartilage. Interesting thing about the cricoid cartilage is the only solid ring of cartilage in the entire respiratory system, yeah? So the cricoid is a full, complete ring, yeah? Once you get below that into the trachea, all of the cartilages in the trachea are C-shaped, yeah? They have space at the back, yeah? They don't go all the way around. The cricoid does go all the way around. And that's important because a couple of the other cartilages we're going to talk about sit on the back of the cricoid ring. Yeah, but we'll get to that. So this is what you'll be seeing if you look at the larynx from the front, yeah? Hyoid bone at the top, thyroid cartilage below that, cricoid cartilage below that, and then you're into the trachea. Okay? If we then flip that round to look from a posterior view, yeah? Let's just get rid of all this. So now let's have a look at the larynx from the back. From a posterior view, yeah, a lot of it's still going to be the same. You'll still see the hyoid from the back, yeah. You'll still see the thyroid cartilage from the back, yeah, because the thyroid cartilage doesn't have a back, yeah. So you'll still see the thyroid, and below that we'll still be seeing the full cricoid ring. Yeah, but the thing that will be different when we look at the back of the larynx is we'll be able to see the two cartilages that sit on the back of the cricoid ring, yeah? And these two cartilages are your arytenoids. Yeah, your arytenoid cartilages sat on the back of the cricoid ring, yeah? Now, technically, the arytenoids are then also attached to another pathetic pieces of cartilage called your corniculate cartilages, not really relevant to what we're going to talk about, yeah? They are there, but what I want you to focus on is that the arytenoids are sat on the back of the cricoid ring, okay? And that's going to be our posterior view. And then obviously, yes, the trachea is going to be coming down here. Obviously, behind the trachea, you've actually got the esophagus. Yeah, so you'd be seeing that rather than the trachea if you were looking from the back. Okay, but this is sort of these are the main sort of players in terms of the intrinsic muscles of the larynx. Yeah, your thyroid cartilage, your cricoid cartilage, your arytenoid cartilages. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I hope you've seen enough diagrams so that you can map this onto what you've already seen. Yeah. The last view, and this is the last view that we're going to look at, and this is the view that we're going to stay with. We're going to look from a superior view. Yeah, imagine you're looking down into somebody's larynx. Yeah. So if we then superior view. Okay. So if we're looking down into somebody's larynx, yeah. Let's say we're past, the first thing you'll see is the hyoid bone, yeah, because that's the most superior structure. Let's say we've gone past the hyoid. The next structure we're going to see is the thyroid cartilage. And if we say that anterior is this way, posterior is that way, yeah, then the thyroid cartilage is kind of going to be like that, yeah, with this being that laryngeal prominence, otherwise known as the Adam's apple. Yeah. Underneath, so deeper into the board, inferior to that, you then have the cricoid ring. Yeah, and remember I did say that the cricoid and the thyroid cartilage, they are connected, there are joints here. Yeah, but then that would be our cricoid ring. And then on the posterior aspect of the cricoid ring, we then have our two arytenoid cartilages here and here. Yeah, this is what you'd be seeing if you were looking down into somebody's larynx. Okay, now this is probably the best view, this superior view, in terms of thinking about the vocal cords themselves. Okay, now I said right at the beginning of this video, the vocal cords extend from the thyroid cartilage at the front to the arytenoids at the back. Yeah, so it's the easiest thing in the world to just draw the vocal cords here and say, well, that's it. That is the vocal cords. If you want to understand a little bit about what the vocal cords actually are, you need to understand one of the membranes of the larynx, which is called your conus elasticus. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to be able to represent this visually very well at all, but use the name. Yeah, conus elasticus makes you think of a cone. Yeah, and I want you to think of like an ice cream cone. Okay, so conus elasticus, the membrane conus elasticus, is its origin, it starts off the entire circumference of the cricoid ring. Yeah, imagine a membrane coming off the entirety of this cartilage, yeah, this entire ring, okay? And like an ice cream cone, once it comes off, you would expect it to taper off, taper off, taper off, taper off, and finish at a single point. Yeah, that's what a cone looks like, okay? It's not quite like that. Instead of tapering off to a point, once the membrane comes off the top of the cricoid cartilage, what it does instead is it just flattens. It flattens and flattens and flattens and flattens until you end up with this double layer slit, this double layered slit, yeah? With one end of that slit attaching here, and the other end of that slit attaching onto these, okay? So then the tops of this flattened cone, the top free hanging margins become your vocal cords. Yeah, so that's what your vocal cords actually are. You've got this membrane that comes off the top of the cricoid cartilage and then just flattens out to extend from the thyroid cartilage at one end to the arytenoid cartilages at the other end, yeah? And to be specific, your arytenoid cartilages have vocal processes, that's the name of them, yeah? Sticking out the front of the arytenoid cartilages, which is what these attach to. Okay, so that is what your vocal cords actually are. Okay, they're the freestanding upper borders of your conus elasticus. Okay, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, don't worry too much about it for the rest of this video. The actual take-home message here is just that the vocal cords extend from your thyroid cartilage to your arytenoid cartilages. If you understand that, then actually we can work with the muscles and it will still make sense. Okay? Okay, right, I hope that made sense. Let's now talk about the muscles themselves, yeah? So we're gonna talk about the muscles in terms of functional groups, yeah? And this is going back to what I said at the beginning of this video, that the vocal cords can actually only do 4 things, yeah? They can get longer, they can get shorter, they can get pulled apart, or they can get pushed together, yeah? So if we look at each of those 4 muscles, each of those 4 movements in turn, then we can link it to the muscle that is responsible for it, yeah? So let's have a look first at lengthening and shortening, yeah? So this is tension of the vocal cords or relaxation of the vocal cords, okay? So I've thrown this, I've tidied this up a little bit from the previous one. So we've still got this superior view, yeah? We're looking down at the thyroid cartilage from above, yeah? Underneath the thyroid cartilage, you've got the cricoid ring with the 2 arytenoid cartilages sat on the top of it, yeah? And then extending from the thyroid cartilage at the front to the arytenoids at the back is going to be our 2 vocal cords, our vocal folds, yeah? Interestingly, I didn't say previously, this is kind of the view that you would have if you were intubating somebody. Yeah, if someone's very, very sick and you're wanting to put a tube down into their trachea to help them breathe, you have to visualize this so that you know to pass the tube between the vocal cords into the trachea. Yeah, so this is the view that you would have with a laryngoscope if you were intubating someone. Just thought that'd be interesting. Okay, so we're talking about lengthening or shortening the vocal cords, yeah, tension and relaxation. The principle here is that the arytenoid cartilages are sat on the cricoid ring, and the cricoid ring is attached to the thyroid cartilage, yeah? So if we were wanting to make these longer or shorter, the arytenoids can't move, yeah? They can't move forwards and backwards because they're on top of the cricoid ring, so they can't go anywhere. Yeah, whereas the thyroid cartilage, because it doesn't have a back, yeah, because these are joints that allow the thyroid cartilage to move forwards and backwards, if we're talking about lengthening or shortening the vocal cords, it's the thyroid cartilage that has to do the moving. Yeah, so we now know that any muscle that is involved in lengthening or shortening the vocal cords, its action is going to be on the thyroid cartilage. Okay, so if we let's look at tension first. Let's look at lengthening the vocal cords. So just think logically, in order to make the vocal cords longer, we're going to need something that is going to pull the thyroid cartilage forwards and sort of down, yeah, because by moving it like that, the cords are going to get longer, okay? Now, the muscle that is responsible for that is going to be one that extends from the cricoid ring to the thyroid cartilage, okay? It's going to come off the front of the cricoid ring and then extends backwards to insert onto the outside of the thyroid cartilage like that. Yeah, we could even have it going further back even, to be honest. All the way sort of back here. Yeah, a muscle like that. Okay, so that when that muscle contracts, you can imagine it's going to move that way. That's going to pull the thyroid cartilage forward. And as a result, the cords are going to get longer. Yeah, now this muscle going from the cricoid cartilage from the thyroid cartilage, remember what I said at the beginning, the names help you out. If it's going from cricoid to thyroid, the name of this muscle is going to be your cricothyroid. Yeah? So this is the muscle that is responsible for lengthening the vocal cords, tensing the vocal cords, yeah? Coming off the front of the cricoid ring, extending backwards to insert onto the sides of the thyroid cartilage so that when it contracts, the thyroid cartilage is pulled forwards and down, lengthening the cords. Okay, and of course there would be one on the other side as well. Yeah, extending all the way, let's say it's extending all the way back to there. Okay, so that's your cricothyroid muscle, yeah, responsible for tensing the vocal cords. Okay, the opposite of tension is relaxation, yeah, so we're now wanting to shorten the vocal cords, yeah. So what that effectively means is we're wanting to pull the thyroid cartilage and the arytenoid cartilages together. Yeah, because by pulling these two together, the cords are going to get shorter. Now remember, the arytenoids can't move forwards and backwards, so it has to be the thyroid cartilage that does the moving. But if we just want to pull these together, it's the easiest thing in the world to just stick a muscle between them, isn't it? If we just stick a muscle that goes from here to there on both sides, then when these muscles contract, they're going to pull that way, and as a result, the thyroid cartilage gets pulled backwards and the cords get shorter. Yeah? And so that's the muscle that is responsible for relaxing the vocal cords. And again, we are going from the thyroid cartilage to the arytenoid cartilages. The name gives it away. Thyroarytenoid. I'll run that room there. Thyroarytenoid. Yeah? So they're the muscles that are responsible for lengthening and shortening the vocal cords. Yeah? Just note, there's only one muscle for each movement so far. Yeah? There is only one muscle that is responsible for lengthening the vocal cords, which is your cricothyroid, and there's only one muscle responsible for shortening your vocal cords, which is your thyroarytenoid. Okay? So these are the two muscles that are responsible for lengthening and shortening the vocal cords. All right. Now, just a final thing. I'm not going to mention it too much in this video, but you might come across in certain sources a muscle called Vocalis. I'll just pop it up here somewhere. Vocalis. Yeah. Different sources say different things. Some sources just say that Vocalis is a specific part of this one. Yeah, because Vocalis is basically muscle fibres that are literally on the vocal cords themselves. You can imagine sort of like this. Yeah, so some sources will just say that Vocalis is specific fibres of the thyroarytenoid muscle. Other sources will treat Vocalis as a muscle in its own right. Now, it doesn't really do much, yeah. From what I can tell, Vocalis is involved in sort of very, very minute changes to the shape of the vocal cords from front to back, yeah. I wouldn't worry too much about Vocalis, okay, but it's certainly closely associated with the thyroarytenoid muscle, because this muscle is going to be travelling alongside the vocal cords, running from the arytenoids at the back to the thyroid at the front. Okay? And that's tension and relaxation of the vocal cords done. Okay? Alright, so the other movement that we said that the vocal cords can do is we pull them apart or we push them together. Yeah, so abduction of the vocal cords versus adduction of the vocal cords. The only other two movements that the vocal cords can do. Now, again, if you just think about this logically, the thyroid cartilage at the front is a solid plate of cartilage. Yeah, you can't pull it apart or push it together, yeah, because it's one plate, yeah. Whereas the two arytenoids, because they are two separate cartilages, we are going to have ways of pulling the arytenoids apart and pushing them together, yeah. So the principle here is just as with tension and relaxation, it was the thyroid that always did the moving. With abduction and adduction, it's always the arytenoids that do the moving. Yeah, it's the arytenoid cartilages that are going to be acted on by these muscles in order to pull the vocal cords apart and push them together. Okay, so abduction first, so that's pulling the vocal cords apart. Yeah, only one muscle, again, same as up here, there's only one muscle that is responsible for pulling the vocal cords apart. Yeah, now the principle at work here is, think of the arytenoid cartilages like a pair of double doors. Yeah, you can, and they can sort of rotate open and closed. Yeah, now we can sort of see here that the arytenoid cartilages they're sort of described as triangular in shape or sort of pyramidal in shape. Yeah, we've already mentioned the vocal processes at the front of the arytenoid cartilages, and that's what actually attaches to the vocal cords themselves. These two processes on the side of the arytenoid cartilages are known as the muscular processes, and the reason they're called muscular processes is because this is where all of the various muscles attach to. Okay, so for abduction of the vocal cords, yeah, the muscle that is responsible for abduction is one called your posterior cricoarytenoid. Yeah? Oh, have I been spelling arytenoid wrong the entire time? How do you spell arytenoid? Hey? I think I have. Oh, that's shocking, isn't it? Oh, I promise I know what I'm talking about. Arytenoid, Aryten. Yeah, the Y before the E. Not like that. Not like that. Oh, have I been spelling it wrong the entire... Oh. God's sake. Anyway, doesn't matter. You know what I mean. Posterior cricoarytenoid. So this muscle, again, use the name. Yeah. So cricoarytenoid means going from the cricoid ring to the arytenoid ring. No one's going to have any faith in what I have to say from this point on, are we? Come on, let's carry on. Be a professional. Cricoarytenoid. So this is going from the cricoid ring to the arytenoid cartilages, yeah? And posterior means at the back, okay? So to put this into perspective then, so your posterior cricoarytenoid is going to be coming off the back of the cricoid ring and going up to extend onto the muscular process of the arytenoids. Yeah, so coming off the back of the cricoid ring and then going up and forwards to attach to the muscular processes of the arytenoid cartilages. What that means is when this muscle contracts, the muscular processes are going to get pulled backwards. They're going to get pulled posteriorly, yeah? And if you imagine, if you pull the sides of the arytenoids backwards, the front of the arytenoids is going to turn out. Yeah, this is ultimately going to cause rotation of the arytenoids, and as a result, the vocal cords are going to get pulled out. Yeah, so that is why this muscle causes abduction of the vocal cords. Yeah, by pulling the muscular processes backwards, the arytenoids are going to externally rotate, and the vocal cords are going to get pulled apart. Okay, so that's the posterior cricoarytenoid. This is the only muscle that is responsible for abduction of the vocal cords. Okay, cool. So let me then get rid of these arrows just to give us a bit more room. The final movement that we can do with our vocal cords is adduction, yeah, pressing them together. Now, if you've sort of kept a tally in your head as we've gone through, we said right at the beginning there are 6 muscles in total to know about. We've so far covered 3. We've only got 1 movement left, but we've still got 3 muscles accounted for, yeah? And that is because adduction, yeah, pressing the vocal cords together, has 3 muscles responsible for it. Yeah, these other 3 movements only got 1. Adduction has 3. And the reason for that is going all the way back to what we very first said at the start. From an evolutionary perspective, the most important function of the vocal cords is to stop yourself from aspirating. Yeah, you take a sip of water, it goes down the wrong way, you need to be able to slam your vocal cords shut. So that is adduction, isn't it? That's bringing the vocal cords together, which is why this last movement has 3 muscles responsible for it rather than just 1. Okay, so adduction, 3 muscles for it. The first of those muscles is the other cricoarytenoid. Yeah, so if we think that the principle here was that this muscle came off the back, travelled forward to insert onto the arytenoids, so that when it contracted, it pulled the arytenoids backwards. Yeah, we now need one that's going to go the other way, basically, to do the opposite. Okay, now it would be great if it was the anterior cricoarytenoid. Unfortunately, it's not. The other cricoarytenoid muscle is your lateral cricoarytenoid. Yeah, and the reason it's called lateral is because it's coming off the lateral aspects of the cricoid ring. It's not coming off the front of the cricoid ring, it's coming off sort of here-ish. Yeah, but then travelling backwards to insert onto, again, the muscular process of the arytenoids like that. So then you can imagine when this muscle contracts, the muscle's going to pull that way, yeah, which means the muscular processes of the arytenoids get pulled forward, the arytenoids are going to internally rotate, and as a result, the vocal cords are going to move in. Yeah, so that is why the lateral cricoarytenoids cause adduction, yeah, because they cause the arytenoids to internally rotate, pressing the vocal cords together. Okay, so that's your lateral cricoarytenoid. Okay, that's the other cricoarytenoid muscle. The final 2 muscles that are responsible for adduction, yeah, they always go together. There's not really any point in thinking of them as distinct. They sort of come as a functional unit, and these are the muscles that actually most people are most comfortable with. Yeah, our final 2 muscles are your transverse arytenoids and your oblique arytenoids. And again, we can use the name to help us understand what these muscles are, where they come from, where they go, yeah? Arytenoid is the only cartilage being mentioned in the name, so they can only run between the 2 arytenoids, can't involve the thyroid or the cricoid at all, yeah? Transverse arytenoids just mean that it's going to go in a straight line between the 2, yeah? The oblique arytenoids, oblique means diagonal, yeah? And actually, if you look at the back of the arytenoid cartilage, you'll see fibres that sort of cross over each other in an X, yeah? They'll just sort of cross over like that, yeah? All of this is on the back of the arytenoid cartilages, yeah? Sort of connecting the 2 in a straight line for the transverse one, or connecting the 2 in an X for the oblique ones, yeah? And the principle behind these 2, yeah, is that we're no longer talking about rotating the arytenoid cartilages, because that's what these 2 did, wasn't it? Yeah, it was sort of externally or internally rotating them. The transverse and the oblique arytenoids literally will just pull the arytenoids together. Will literally physically move them closer together. And as a result then, the vocal cords are also going to press together like that. Okay? So then that is the 3 muscles involved in adduction. Yeah, and the reason adduction gets 3 muscles instead of 1 is because from an evolutionary perspective, it is the most important movement of the vocal folds. Yeah. Okie doke, last but not least, let's just talk a little bit about the innervation. So the innervation of the intrinsic muscle of the larynx, I said ultimately it's all the vagus nerve, yeah, it's all cranial nerve 10. We can then divide those muscles up into like sort of specific branches, yeah, so 5 out of those 6 muscles are innervated by the recurrent laryngeal branch. One of those muscles, and it's the cricothyroid, yeah, that muscle that's responsible for tensing the vocal cords, Cricothyroid is the only one that's not innervated by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. It's innervated by the superior laryngeal nerve, specifically the external branch. Okay, so I did just want to do a bit of a visual representation of what all that looks like, because particularly the recurrent laryngeal nerve, a bit of a weird one. Yeah, I'm not convinced it's evolution's finest hour, really. It sort of goes completely the wrong way and then has to go back on itself. This, I mean, it's not really to scale, but this is the larynx, yeah, so hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage. You can imagine behind all of this is where the vocal cords are and all of this sort of stuff. Down here, I've represented some of the major arteries of the mediastinum and of the chest, yeah, so we've got the aortic arch here, yeah. 3 main branches off the top of the aortic arch, yeah, your brachiocephalic trunk first, then your left common carotid, and then your left subclavian. The brachiocephalic trunk then breaks off into the right subclavian and the right common carotid, yeah. This is going to be important for when we talk about the recurrent laryngeal, okay? So the vagus nerve, yeah, the vagus nerve, as one of your cranial nerves, it originates off the brainstem, doesn't it? Yeah, it doesn't come off the spinal cord. It's one that comes off the medulla oblongata of the brainstem. So this is going to be all the way up here, okay? You've got a left and a right vagus nerve, and they are just going to be making their way down the neck. Yeah, one on either side. So you can imagine that this is the left cranial nerve 10, and this is the right. Oops, cranial nerve 10. Okay, just making their way down the neck, yeah, within your carotid sheath, if you're interested, okay? As we approach the larynx, so around the sort of level of, yeah, C3, this is where the first branch, or the first relevant branch, will come off the vagus nerve, yeah? So most of the vagus nerve will just carry on straight down, but we're seeing a branch come off here, and this is the superior laryngeal nerve, yeah, or the superior laryngeal branch of the vagus, okay? So this is going to be the one that is responsible for supplying your cricothyroid muscle, okay? And yeah, not going to go into a huge amount of detail more than that, but generally your superior laryngeal nerve does then split into a further 2 branches. We've got one going off here and one going down there. This is going to be the internal branch of the superior laryngeal nerve, and this is going to be the external branch of the laryngeal nerve, yeah, of the superior laryngeal nerve, okay? And technically, if you want to be super specific, the internal branch of the superior laryngeal nerve is responsible for all of the sensory stuff of the larynx. Yeah, so things like your choking reflex and all of this sort of stuff will involve this branch, yeah, because it's the sensation side of things. It is technically the external branch of the superior laryngeal nerve that is responsible for innervating the cricothyroid muscle. Because if you think about it, the cricothyroid muscle is going to be here, isn't it? Yeah, so this is the branch that supplies that, okay? So that's the exception to the rule, yeah? Cricothyroid is the only muscle that is innervated by the external branch of the superior laryngeal nerve, which is a branch of the vagus. Hard work, yeah? For the rest of them, we're talking about the recurrent laryngeal nerve, yeah? So having given off the superior laryngeal branch, the rest of the vagus nerve will just carry on down on both sides. Yeah, it goes all the way down through the neck and then enters into the chest. Yeah, on the left-hand side, it passes in front of the arch of the aorta. On the right-hand side, it will pass in front of the right subclavian artery, like that. Yeah, and then once the vagus nerves have passed those major vessels, it's only then that they give off the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Yeah, so it's all the way down here that we get one nerve coming off here and one nerve coming off here, okay? Recurrent, literally because it's going back on itself, yeah? So once these have come off, We then tuck underneath, on the left hand side we tuck underneath the arch of the aorta to head back up, and on the right hand side we tuck underneath and behind the right subclavian and then back up. Okay, and then once they've looped underneath those big vessels, the recurrent laryngeal nerve then just travels back up the neck, which is why I would argue this really isn't evolution's finest hour. Yeah, the vagus nerves were literally right there. They could have just given off the branches, but for some reason we go all the way down to the chest to then come all the way back up. I wonder if there is. I don't know if there is like a biological explanation as to why that is the case. I don't know. But yes, once they've come back up, the recurrent laryngeal nerves will then go all the way back up to the larynx, and that is basically, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but that they will then enter the larynx and supply all of the other muscles that we've talked about. Yeah, so the thyroarytenoid muscle, the posterior cricoarytenoid, the lateral cricoarytenoid, the transverse and oblique arytenoids, all innervated by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Okay, so that's roughly what the innervation of the larynx, the motor innervation of the larynx looks like. Yeah, ultimately it's all the vagus nerve, but then we've got the superior laryngeal branch supplying the cricothyroid muscle, the recurrent laryngeal branches supplying the other 5. Okay guys, that's the end of that one. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy me. And if you've got any feedback, good, bad, or otherwise, please put it in the comments underneath the video. Yeah, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. All the best guys, have a good day.